All right. So someone that did get this thing working, do you want to put in your CSS code for this one into Slack? Cool. I have some. Ooh, couple of mins and a couple of maxes here. Very cool. So let me show you what. Let me show you my solution. If you guys want to try out those in Slack, I'm going to share my screen. So I went the vmin route for this one. I created a div, gave it a class of box1, and then here in my box1 rule, I made a width of 40 vmin and a height of 40 vmin, and then I made the background red. So in this case, it's going to take whichever, if height or width is less on the square, then it's going to adopt that dimension for all four sides, or for the height and width rather. So it's that nice square shape. Cool, nice work, you guys. For the last one, let me put this into Slack, and I'm actually going to show you what this one should look like. So for this last challenge, let's create 4 block elements that have different background colors. And no matter what the dimensions of your screen are, each square should be exactly the height and width of your screen. And so what I'm going for here is, if you notice my browser window here, so I have this first section, the screen section. As I scroll up, notice that this takes the entire viewport width and height. And as I scroll down, here's another section that takes up the entire width and height. You guys have probably seen websites like this, right? With those those big frames, if you will. Then you scroll down, here's another section. Then there's another section down here. But if I resize my screen, let's say that I make it really small, and I start up here at the top, it's the same principle. So based on the viewport width and height, this first section, the green section, takes up the entire viewport. The yellow section takes up the entire viewport, and so on and so forth. So see if you can come up with some code that will mimic that behavior. We'll take a few minutes to let you guys hack on that. Cool, we got 7 thumbs ups. Take about another 30 seconds and we'll see an example. And if you would, for those of you that did get this working successfully, I'd love to see what you guys came up with CSS-wise. So would you mind putting in your CSS code, sharing that with us in Slack? It'd be awesome. It's looking good, guys. Before I show an example, if you guys go into Slack, check out Zach's, what Zach slacked out. I'm just picking his at random here. Do you guys see any opportunity to refactor this code? Just taking a look. So whether or not this works or doesn't work, just taking a peek at Zach's code, is there any way that we could refactor this, maybe simplify it? Do you guys have any suggestions for that?
I did pretty much exactly what he did, but Jason definitely got it slimmed down just by basically putting all 4 boxes into a div and just modifying the div.
Yeah, so yeah, Jason's looks a little drier, or don't repeat yourself. So this is just, I mean, if you got this working, then that's all that we're really worried about right now. But so I just slacked out an example of one of Zach's classes. So all 4 of his boxes have the same height, the same width, and the same color value on those properties. So that may be a good opportunity to take those 3 properties that are reused, maybe put that into a separate class, maybe on a div or something. I think that's what Jason was going for. So yeah, it's really easy for CSS rules to get really unruly and really, it's really easy to reuse code unnecessarily. So, but yeah, that's a really good opportunity to refactor. Yeah, Eric's looks pretty tight too. That's great. Cool. I'm going to share my screen quickly and show you guys what I came up with. I love seeing what you guys come up with because there's usually several different ways to do this stuff. So in my example, I just created 4 section block elements here: first section, second, third, and last. And then I created some CSS rules here. I gave each section a different color. I wanted to play around with some, does anyone remember what this is an example of? I'll put this into Slack. What is this an example of? Cool, yeah, Eric's got it. Yeah, just a pseudo element. So remember, if it has those colons, it's considered a pseudo selector, making a pseudo element. So if we look down here, I have section, I have height of 100 VH. So that's going to apply to all my sections. And then all my sections by default are going to have a yellow background. And then I went in and styled each one. I just gave each one different colors using these pseudo selectors. First of type, nth of type, which would be the second one, and then last of type, which would be the 4th. And so when I scroll up here, they all take up the entire width and height of the screen. So yeah, just one way to do it. And I also wanted to point out, if you're looking in the lesson README, I put all of my solution code in the README. If you click on this solution code drop down right here, this little details tab, you can see kind of my finished HTML and CSS. Again, there's usually several ways to do this, and this is just one suggested solution. But if you want to grab that code, it's all here in the lesson. Let me do a quick fist of 5 on viewport width and height. How are you guys feeling? Got some fives? Okay, great. Yeah, just another strategy when you're talking about responsive design. Just a really cool unit of measurement that you can tap into. So awesome. Let's move on to Flexboxes and then get you guys to some exercise time. Has anyone, give me a thumbs up if you've played around with Flexboxes. I know, for example, Dana's been reading ahead, doing some Flexbox Froggy, which is a really fun online kind of tutorial on getting sharper on Flexboxes. But has anyone else played around with Flexbox before? It's kind of a newer type of CSS approach, but it's really cool. So up to now, CSS has been more difficult than it should be for certain tasks, like vertical alignment and 3-column layout. But Flexbox has let us do these things easily. It also makes fluid layout much easier. So long story short, the way I like to think of Flexboxes is that it does a lot of the height container type stuff. So there's a lot of libraries that are good if you resize your browser, the vertical or the horizontal rather. But what Flexbox really makes easy in the Mediaite example that we looked at earlier, if you have boxes of content that you want the height to be somewhat uniform, Flexboxes are a great strategy for that. So let's take a look at this screenshot, and I'm going to have you guys read a quick article just to kind of get a little bit sharper on this before we move forward. This is a quick diagram of what the Flexbox module looks like. So there's a main axis, and there's also a cross axis, and we'll talk about that here in a moment when we get into our exercises. But with Flexboxes, you get to worry about the width and the height of given elements. And so let me post a quick article into Slack. Maybe you guys can take a peek before we actually do these exercises. So if you would, take 5 minutes and read about CSS Flexbox. So this article is pretty dense, so don't worry about absorbing it all. We're going to take a look at some examples. But skim that article, and hopefully it'll give us a little bit of a background before we take a look at some examples of what Flexbox can do for us. And we'll take maybe 5-6 minutes for that. All right, let's take another few seconds and we'll just hop into some examples. I know that's a pretty long article, so no worries if you didn't quite get to the end there. So to start off, just put a question into Slack if someone wants to come on mic, give us their quick and dirty explanation. Can someone explain Flexbox in their own words? What is Flexbox going to do for us? Any takers?
It's a way of automatically.
Go for it, please.
It seems to be a way of automatically deciding on how to take up extra space.
Yeah, it accomplishes several different things. Yeah, spacing is one cool thing we're going to see. So we don't have to set, we don't have to worry about padding or margin, those types of things. If we use Flexbox correctly, Flexbox is going to take care of that stuff for us with a lot less code. Again, the other thing I really like about Flexbox is that it really helps with kind of the height, making the heights of different elements uniform, particularly if you have boxes or lists of things. So I just put a couple, this is actually from W3 Schools. I think it's a pretty concise explanation. So Flexbox ensures that elements behave predictably when the page layout must accommodate different screen sizes and different display devices. So again, a lot of times when we're talking about responsive and fluid design, we're worried more about kind of the width of the screen, right? Because different, mobile is more obviously smaller than a larger desktop or something, but Flexbox really gives you more flexibility with the height of different elements. So for many applications, the Flexbox model provides an improvement over the block model in that it does not use floats. So I think in that article, it actually talked a little bit about floats. So floats are still pretty awesome, but I think that floats are definitely limited. And so Flexbox is another CSS strategy that can do more than floats and can be a replacement for a situation where maybe if you wanted objects to float in a certain manner. The Flex container's margins collapse with the margins of its contents. So again, Flex is going to do all of those calculations for us, and it's going to make our lives a lot easier. So let's take a look at some examples. We can use the same files that we did a minute ago, but I'd love if you guys could set them up. We're going to clean them up just a little bit, and I'll put those instructions into Slack here. So the setup for a little bit of a code along before we hop into our breakout rooms, we'll use the same files as before, but if you want, just comment out all of the body, all of the HTML code, and also all of the CSS code, because we're going to start from scratch. You can actually delete it if you want to. I'm going to push all this code up to your repo so you have it for reference. And then create a section tag, section elements with 4 p tags inside it. And then each p tag should have the content 1, 2, 3, 4, and then give each p tag a yellow background, a black border, and 1 EM of padding. If you're looking in the lesson README, there's a little details area if you want to click on it. I actually have all of the code to get this set up, so if you just want to go in there and copy it, that's absolutely cool. And here's a screenshot additionally of what your HTML and CSS should look like. And so I'll pop that here into Slack to get us going. So yeah, the section tags there in Slack, that should just be inside your body. And then that one CSS rule should be all that we have in CSS. All right. Cool. So let's move forward. Let's take a look at some examples. We're not doing a deep dive into the documentation. We'll look at a few examples and get you guys into breakout rooms for a little bit more of an exercise. So the first thing we want to take a look at is the display properties for our Flexbox. So I'll put a screenshot into Slack here. So the display property pretty much has flex and inline flex as our options. And then we have inline flex for inline elements. So the first challenge I want to give you guys to check this out, let's make that section tag in our HTML. Go ahead and create a section rule and give it a display of flex in your CSS file. And give me a thumbs up when you get that working, and then I'll show you my example. As a matter of fact, I'll go ahead and share my screen. So if you got that basic setup working rather, this is what we should see. So just 4 p tags within that section. And right now they're taking up the entire width of our viewport there. Cool. So to get all of these flex goodies working, is the first thing we have to do is define display flex on that particular element. So we need to do that before any of the other flex properties are available to us. So in my CSS, I'm going to create a section rule, and let's just do a display flex. And so now if we refresh, so the layout changes a little bit, right? So now these are inline elements, and not much else is happening. We're going to add some more properties to it, but this is the behavior we should see when we add that display flex property. So let's take this a little bit further. Let's take a look at direction, flex direction. So flex direction, there's a couple of options here: row reverse, column reverse. And let's take a look at what 2 of these would look like. And I'll put these into Slack. So I'd like you guys to add a flex direction property to your section tag, and try column-reverse as the value first, and then refresh your browser and observe the behavior, and then change that to row reverse and see what happens. Cool. Got a couple of thumbs ups coming in there. So yeah, so what we want to do for this one is we just want to add this flex direction property to our section tag. And again, this is only going to work because the first thing we did is add this display flex. So that's kind of the first property we need to give us all of the other flex goodness. So firstly, let's try the column reverse, and we'll see what that does. So we see that takes us back to kind of those block elements. It actually puts them into a column, right? And then it just reverses our elements. So it's 4, 3, 2, 1 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you can probably guess what row reverse is going to do. So it puts them back in line. It's going to hug the reverse side of the screen, and it's also going to reverse the order of the elements within our flex section container. So 4, 3, 2, 1. So that's the behavior we should get. We're still not really seeing the benefits of like the spacing and the padding and such. We'll get to that here shortly. But we didn't have to use floats, which is really handy. Flex is going to do all this heavy lifting for us. Pretty sweet. Cool, so let's take a look at justify content. Another Flexbox property. So we have a couple of options here. So now we're going to start seeing some of the kind of the padding and the spacing capability of the Flexbox. So it's going to horizontally align the flex items when the items don't use all the space on the main axis. And so right here in my example, we've got a lot of white space over here, a lot of negative space. And so I want Flexbox to kind of do the calculations in space however many elements I have. I want Flex to space those out nice and equally. So for this one, we're going to add a couple of properties. I'll put these into Slack. So now what I'd like you guys to do, the first thing, go ahead and change the flex direction of the section tag to a row. Let's just simplify that. And then try those 3 justify content, property, and values. And again, after each one, just refresh your browser and observe the behavior of our HTML, of our browser window. Cool, getting a couple of thumbs ups coming through there. So yes, I'm going to go ahead while you guys are working. I'll go ahead and demonstrate kind of what this behavior should look like. So I changed the flex direction back to row. So we have a row. If I refresh, so now we're back just to the normal order of the rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're in line again. So let's add that justify content property. And to start, I'm going to set this to center. So that's going to take that entire section tag and it centers those elements kind of at the top of my page. So if I have some sort of, maybe a nav container or some sort of, maybe some sort of header element that has some other pieces of content inside it, if I happen to want it centered on the page at the top or something, that may be a good strategy. Let's check out space between and space around. So space between, if you kind of play around with your browser here, so again, space between is going to take all of the empty space on that axis that isn't currently being occupied, and it's just going to go ahead and set it up equally between the elements. So this is super handy because we didn't have to play around with floats. We didn't have to play around with like trying to figure out the padding. Not to mention, what if we don't know how many elements we're eventually going to have? If we want to add elements, take away elements, if we'd hard-coded some sort of padding, that may get a little tricky. But this makes it really easy. And then if we change this to space around, so that's going to put space around all the elements, obviously. It puts a little bit of padding there. So if we want some padding on the left and the right of the end elements, so we'll get that in there as well. Pretty handy. All right, cool. So 2 more, and then we'll take a little bit of a break before breakout time. Let me throw this screenshot into Slack here. So let's talk a little bit about align items, this property. So this is similar to justify content, but for the cross axis. So remember, the cross axis is kind of that up and down axis. So let's see what some of these options will do for us. And I'll paste our instructions here into Slack. I'll paste them in a little bit of a different way here. Cool. So 3 little exercises. So let's give the section tag a height of 200 px and a background of green. And then add that align items property to your section tag. First, try a flex start value. Refresh the browser, check that out, and then check flex end and see what that looks like. So I'm going to hop into my example, but it looks like Dana has a good question. So maybe you mentioned it, but you cannot combine vmin or vmax with flex, it seems. Yeah, so they're probably going to like cancel each other out and such. You probably want to pick one or the other as your strategy. With flex, obviously, there's a lot more available to you, a lot more customization. You have more properties available as opposed to vmin and max. But yeah, you probably just want to choose your poison. All right. Got like 5 thumbs up, so keep working on that. Let me throw these rules and such into my CSS. We'll take a look at what it looks like. So the first thing I'm going to do, let me give this section tag a height of 200 px and a background of green. So this will just help demonstrate what these other properties are going to do. So if I refresh, we should see something like this, right? So that flex container is working really nicely. It's making the p tags fit the height of the flex box, which is our section tag. So that's kind of the default behavior. So let's try to dial that in a little bit with our align items property. So the first thing, let's try align items, and then let's try this flex start. Cool. So flex start is going to put the child elements at the start of the flex box. So in this example, at the top of the box, right? And so you can probably guess what flex end is going to do. You put that in there and refresh. So flex in is going to let those elements hug the bottom of our flex box. So that's a handy property there. Cool. And then the last one, then we'll take a break. So let's take a look at this flex wrap property. So by default, flex items are all going to try to fit on one line along the main axis, but you can change that and allow the items to wrap as needed with this property. So let's take a look at an example of what this can do for us. There's several different varieties for this one. We're just going to take a look at a couple of the values. So So there we go. So let's give the p tags a padding of 2 EM. So let's give it a little bit more padding. And then refresh and resize your browser, and the p elements should all remain on one line. And then if you change the flex wrap of the section tag to wrap, resize the browser and observe the behavior. And then change the flex wrap of the section tag to wrap reverse, and then refresh and resize the browser and check out the behavior. Clean this up a little bit. So Zach has a question here. Are any of these properties conflicting? Or should we be able to add flex wrap with all of the other properties as well? Yeah, I found that sometimes they do conflict. It's just kind of a trial and error, particularly when we get into the properties of the flex items, which is kind of the next section of properties. Yeah, sometimes they will conflict. So I try to use like the minimum amount of properties that I need to get the desired effect. You know, I try to keep it really dry as much as I can. So let me go ahead and walk through this example, and then we'll take a break and put you guys in the breakout rooms. So to take a look at the flex wrap property, let's go ahead and give the p tags a padding of 2 EM. So I'm going to increase the padding on all the sides. Then when I refresh, so yeah, so we're getting a little bit of a beefier type of p tag there, so that's good. So let's change the flex wrap of the section tag to wrap. Let's see what happens. So we'll save that and refresh. And so now when we resize the browser, obviously that padding is now kind of taking over the browser width at some point. And so now that we added that flex value or flex wrap with the value of wrap, now these elements are going to be nice. They're going to kind of float around each other when they take up the maximum amount of vertical space there. So that's an example of the wrap property. And then another kind of similar variety here, if you do like a wrap reverse, a lot of these flex properties, the values you'll see in the documentation, there's several like reverse options. So some of these kind of have, you know, binary type of choices. So if we refresh the browser now, and now when we resize, so now when it does kind of that floating wrapping effect, we can see that it does it in reverse. So it's the last element's going to be on top, and it's going to float everything down. So again,
also change the line items to top from flex end to flex start.
Yeah, sure did. Yeah, it just reversed the entire, kind of the entire thing, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So depending on the effect that you want or what type of elements that you're trying to do some flex properties on, some of these may be helpful. So yeah, those are just a couple of examples. I'm going to stop my screen share. Any questions about any of those? Kind of what the Flexbox does. Flexbox is really powerful, and there's a ton of stuff that that we're not going to get to. A lot of it's just kind of getting in there and trial and error. But I wanted to show you guys a couple of the really popular properties. So like a quick fist to 5, how are you guys feeling about Flexboxes? It's definitely one of the more kind of advanced CSS-y things that we've gone through. Okay, some 4s and 5s, cool. So let's do this. Let's take a 5-minute break, and then I'm going to put you guys in the breakout rooms, and we'll have a little bit of lab time and let you guys kind of play around with this stuff yourself. So let's come back at 12:39. Well, let's make it 12:40 p.m. EST, and then we'll have some lab time for you. So I'll see you shortly. All right, folks, welcome back. So the best way to practice this stuff is just to do it. So we're gonna hop into lab time. And these are two lab options for you. The first one is this Flexbox Froggy, which is pretty awesome. I know that a couple of you have probably taken a look at this before. This is like probably the best tool out there to get a good grasp of what Flexbox can do for you. I'm gonna share my screen for a moment. So this is Flexbox Froggy. There's 24 challenges. So if you wanna go through this, it's pretty cool. So pretty much, works the muscles of all of the properties available to you with Flexbox. So this would be the first lab exercise. If you get through this before lunch, the second exercise I put in here into Slack is called the Hyrule Potion Shop. And so let's take a look at that one. If you click on that repo link, so this is up in the GA Students repo, for this one, you want to go into the CSS file. And if you look, the only thing you need to do is play around with the CSS file. And you'll see that there's some commented out sections here. And it even gives you a hint. So for example, here, this main, let me make this a little larger for you. So this rule for the main tag, for example, you know that it's going to take a display of something. And all these are Flexbox related. This contents class rule is going to take flex row property, and then you need to come up with the value for that. And there's a link in the README itself right here. So here's one solution. So this is what the finished version should look like and the behavior should be. And this is what it looks like. So this is the Hyrule Potion Shop. So notice as we resize the browser, these middle elements, they're pretty responsive, right? Like all the way through. So there aren't any breakpoints. This is totally using Flexbox. And then as we get a little bit smaller, it changes when we get like to smaller browser or device sizes, if you will. Then you can scroll down and now stuff is stacking. So those two kind of asides on each side are now stacked at the bottom. So for you Legends of Zelda fans, maybe this will be interesting for you. But yeah, so I would suggest starting with Flexbox Froggy because it's pretty fun and interactive. And if you get done with that, this is a really cool exercise. Again, the only thing you need to adjust with this Hyrule Potion Shop, you just need to play around with the CSS rules, and it actually gives you some pointers on what the rules should be. So let me stop my share. Any questions about the lab time before we hop into our breakout rooms? Cool. Okay. So I'll check in with you guys periodically. We'll be here if you need us, and I'm going to open the rooms now.
Voyage.